Hey everyone, this is Devin from Hellscube. Welcome back to my series, Frame the Masterpieces. If you're new, thanks for joining me. This is a series where I analyze well-designed cards from the main Hellscubes, hopefully helping aspiring creators with nailing down what a Hellscard actually is. Last time, we talked on the core three: resonance, innovation, and grokkability. Just as a quick refresher, resonance is how well the card engages with the fantasy in its design and how easily recognizable the subject is. Innovation is providing a new spin on magic design or, well, innovating on the medium. Grokkability is how easily a player can get all the information needed to play and draft the card from the card itself. I will still be framing my analyses with these points, but today I'm going to introduce another element that will be the through line to today's segment. A comment on my last video highlighted a point of weakness in the card At Everyone, that it was unclear whether you scry 1 for each damage dealt or scry X, where X is the total damage dealt. In my mind, the answer was fairly clear to me. On reflection, I realized there's some room for a misinterpretation. You see, my answer was colored by something called a ruling, which are provided on Hellfall to give extra clarity to cards that need it. In that ruling, it was made clear that you scry 1 for each point of damage dealt by the card. Now, is that clear from the text on the card? I don't believe so, no. Is it at a significant detriment to the card? No, I also don't think so. Admittedly, it could be clear that it is the case, and in modern times it would most definitely be an errata that includes a reminder text clarification. As for, historical cards, though, this is actually pretty refreshingly close enough. Today, I'll be going over the history of some well-designed cards and what they've done to give you all the information you need to play the card. You'll see that many of the older cards rely on things that aren't as permissible these days. And as you get into the modern day, you'll see that the reminder text and other reading assistive text has a tendency to be far more thorough while still being on the card itself. Additionally, I'll be pointing out some elements that would receive some changes if it were accepted these days. Starting us off in the original Hellscube, we have Fibblethip the Very Lost. The card is a legendary 1/1 blue homunculus creature that costs 1 blue mana. It reads Battlecry. If you have at least 4 other minions, cast Totally Lost, with a reminder blurb informing you that Battlecries do something when you play it from hand. To dive into what makes this card great up top, the resonance here is something fairly common in Hellscube, a reference to magic thrust into the design sensibilities of another card game, or vice versa. In this case, Fibblethip is seemingly wandered into a Hearthstone game as a legendary mage minion there. While that is funny enough, the card has a helper card that we'll discuss later that really sells this theming. As far as innovation, this innovates by utilizing familiar Hearthstone language and framing to easily inform you on what the card does. Translating Battlecry to MTG works well in this context, and the very conditional removal makes for a flexible 1/1 that can either be on board early as an OK creature in blue, or be saved later as a way to get more bang for your resources. Additionally, allowing you to cast a flavorfully related spell on a condition is great, really leveraging the celebrity status of Fibblethip well. Now, for grokkability, we have an odd situation. If you know Hearthstone even a little bit, this card likely makes perfect sense to you, which is great. Utilizing an existing language of design is a great way to bridge concepts to people. However, this is a double-edged sword. If you don't know Hearthstone, this becomes a lot more difficult to parse. The U on the top left of the card is okay in Hearthstone, but in normal Magic cards, someone might not be able to discern what the cost is. The casting of Totally Lost might also be unclear. When you get to cast another card in Hearthstone from a card's Battlecry, it's free. However, in Magic the Gathering, casting a copy of a card from outside the game still requires you to pay its costs natively. The Oracle text on Hellfall clarifies that it is indeed a free cast, sticking close to the Hearthstone assumptions, but these are definitely some relics of old design. The average player may be unsure if this is actually a creature or not as well, or even if it's legendary. Now, something modern design tries to do is magicify cards based in other card games. If this card was made today, it would likely have the blue mana symbol itself on the top left to be abundantly clear that it is in fact the mana cost. Additionally, the type line at the bottom would likely still shove in legendary creature above the homunculus line, just to minimize a misread. Finally, the casting of the Totally Lost would likely add a parenthetical for free to make sure that the transition is a bit smoother from Hearthstone to Magic the Gathering. Earlier, I mentioned a helper card that sells the thematics. That helper card is actually a Hearthstone-themed version of Totally Lost. It looks great, and the simple design of it fits the simplicity of the card. Helper cards like this are how older cards tend to explain references to other cards in Magic's history. As I mentioned last time with my Hellscube 7 topic, most cards these days put any ancillary card text in the art or margins of the card referencing them. In this case, the text of Totally Lost would likely be somewhere in the margins or somehow in the art, since Totally Lost isn't necessarily the most well-known card to reference. Notably, this helper card is actually a bit misleading, as even though the mana value of the spell is 5, the cost is actually 4 generic and 1 blue, which may be relevant to certain effects. The rare coloration also might clue you in that the spell is a blue, but that's not necessarily apparent without the real cost in the mana crystal amount. I will say, though, that the clarity on this card is perfectly functional enough in most play scenarios, provided that you have the helper card on hand if you don't know Totally Lost on its own. Given a modernization, though, the grokkability of this card would be off the charts. Okay, next, representing Hellscube 2, we have It's Prime Time! This card is an artifact that costs 1 generic and 2 green mana to cast, with the rules text, It's Prime Time enters the battlefield with a time counter on 1, an activated ability with tap to add 1 mana of any color and advance the time counter by 1, another activated ability with pay 1 generic and 1 green mana to advance the time counter by 1, and finally a triggered ability of when the time counter moves to 12, sacrifice It's Prime Time and put a Primeval Titan token into play. So, as I discussed last time, a simple pun can go a long way. This takes Primeval Titan, a pretty well-known piece of some higher power format decks, along with the name of the deck it led, Primetime, and translates the concept to a clock pun. Now, not necessarily revolutionary pun-wise, but still definitely funny in the presentation. For those listening and not watching, the image has a clock on the art, and much like Baron von Count, you move the counter across the provided clock to track the effect. The inevitability also plays into the humor. The clock is on board. After a maximum of 11 taps, this will be a Primeval Titan. It will be prime time. A lot of this card's strengths come in the innovation aspect, as the interactive art aspect really marries the concept together. A rock that is hiding a very powerful card is a great way to let mana rocks in draft hold value even towards the late game. And the Prime Titan, basically refunding the rock being sacrificed with 2 lands entering, works well to ease the normal loss that man lands and rocks tend to suffer from. Something fun is that you can accelerate this process by using its own mana ability to fuel the activated ability, and progress the time counter even further. I mentioned before that this mimics Baron von Count, and the on-card tracking really aids the grokkability in a fun and interactive way, rather than storing 12 counters, which could be cumbersome and proliferated even. This just basically utilizes an on-card tracker instead. Now, you may have noticed that this card has the resolution of a thumbnail. That is indeed the resolution of the card provided on Hellfall. In modern times, we do strive to keep these cards printable, so we would likely request a higher resolution to make sure the card retains its readability separate from digital play. You may be wondering, what does this card have to do with the theme of today? Well, you may have noticed that nowhere on the card does it tell you what Primeval Titan does. Now, depending on the person, they might say that Primeval Titan is iconic enough to not have a memorizable text box, or maybe it needs it. Still, as a rebuttal, I would like to point at the bottom right of the card and say that would be a great spot to truncate the token's text box and provide a play aid to those that need it. Notably, there is a token for this Primeval Titan, which does help in both digital and physical, but the main concern here is for the drafter, who may not have partner cards easily available. This concern happened with Thibblethip as well, where play was kept in mind, but not the drafter. As with Thibblethip, this is a pretty simple adjustment if it was modernized, and I'm also in the camp that Primeval Titan is pretty easy to evaluate for a drafter. Generally good, and thus not a very big issue that the rules text for the token isn't apparent. Next up, straight from Hellscube 3, we have Supremacy. It's a sorcery that costs 5 generic mana and 1 white mana to gain 3 life. And the card also has Flash, Conspire, Cascade, Rebound, and Retrace. What? Don't look at me like that. This card is great. Okay, let's frame the discussion a little more. For Resonance, this is playing on keyword soup, a term used to describe creatures whose only abilities are just keywords, just like Achroma, who is giving us this flavor text as if she were our waiter. The neat thing is that these keywords would likely not see their way on a creature keyword soup, and really it's a deconstruction of a food token ability placed on a card. It's a little cheeky with the flash on a sorcery, but the rest of the keywords play great with the theming of soup that is made of keywords. The simple presentation of the orange soup against a stony orange background hits you in the face with the silliness while still tying it all together with the theming. As far as innovation, this has quite a lot of interesting ways to play it, and they almost always rely on you not just paying 6 mana to gain 3 life. Instead, the multiple ways to trigger the Cascade repeatedly help give this some staying power in a late game scenario. Combining Rebound, Retrace, and Cascade just on its own is a fun way to get an effect repeatable, even with the high mana cost, with Conspire giving you even more options to give you more bang for your buck. Now, for grokkability, this card is also interesting. One of the challenges of concepts like these with complex play patterns is having the card do a good job of selling itself, of explaining why and how you should play it. On its face, this is a bad deal. 6 mana for 3 life and a random caster in your deck is the easiest part to grasp, but this card does something very clever with giving you more knowledge on its play pattern. It nests it in the flavor text. Hellscards are usually somewhat complex, so they have to find creative ways to give the player knowledge without interfering with the presentation of the card or overcluttering things with a big chunk of reminder text. Here, the reminder text is instead converted to more casual flavor text, paired with a joke at the end, veiling the italics into a separate chunk that can be ignored on a read if you know what the card actually does at a glance. If you don't, reading the card explains it very well. The use of flavor text as reminder text is a great tool in the toolbox for Hellscards in general, and the card does it great. Alright, moving right on to Hellscube 4, another reminder that this is a higher power format, though I think this one isn't quite as crazy as its fellows. This is Oracle of Zeldiah, a green 2/4 human shaman creature that costs 2 generic and 1 green mana. It has the following effect. At the beginning of each upkeep, choose a season. The seasons mentioned are Spring, which reads you may look at the top card of your library, you may play it if it's a land. Summer, which is you may play an additional land during your turn. Fall, which is an activated ability that costs 3 generic mana to destroy target artifact or enchantment. And Winter, which gives itself +2, +0, and Vigilance. Quite the mouthful, Well, I'll get to how it successfully manages all that text in a bit, but let's start with the resonance. This is a clear reference to Oracle of Moldiah, a weaker statted card that basically has spring and summer of this card at all times. It translates this concept to the Rod of Seasons from Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, and quite successfully, I feel. Spring through fall feel like perfect fits for the seasons, even outside the context of the Zelda game, and winter having it give up on the land shtick and beat your face in feels like a great separation between the seasons working the land and wintertime. Something really fun is that you would expect the season to be sequential, going through a normal year of seasons, but since it's a Zelda reference born from a pun, it allows you to select any season at the start of each of your turns, just like the Rod of Seasons does in Zelda. Even a small joke like this gives you so much room to play around with the mechanics in a satisfying way that can lead to such fun presentations while still blending the source card in. Now, for innovation, this style of rules text and the art elements is something you'll see a lot more of as we progress from Hellscube 4 and onwards, where creators are getting more experimental with what cards can look like and be. Many of the cards in Hellscube 1 through HT3 are a lot more reserved in keeping their rules in the rules box, but many successful cards from this point on are able to seamlessly blend in reminders text, rules text, and more inside of the art assets, making sure no element of the card is wasted. Finally, for grokkability, this card does a neat trick. By making the seasons both the main bulk of the card art and above the rules box, you are usually confronted with having to read them first to evaluate the card, making it difficult to miss your relevant information. Additionally, by not naming the seasons and relying on the source game's visual correlation of colors to seasons, this card is able to trim down the words quite effectively, basically giving clear visual cues over relying on descriptive text. Lastly, this card capitalizes on its space by stretching the important parts of the cards all the way through the margins, ensuring that the card has room to breathe despite the actual denseness of the text. Even if your card has a lot of text like this one, you, as the creator, can add visual flair like this that gives the eye a break from information overload. Alright, so as we get back to Hellscube 6, this is a reminder that it is a commander cube, which is very relevant to this card. Bomb. Bomb is a tougher card to say than actually understand. So, Bomb is a red 6/6 dragon artifact creature that costs 4 generic and 2 red mana. It normally has Myriad, Menace, First Strike, Haste, Fire Breathing for 1 red mana, and Flying. It also has Diffuse, but that's related to how this card is presented. In the shape of a classic media time bomb, there are different wires touching all the keywords minus diffuse. To defuse the card, you cast it for 2 generic and 1 red mana, and when you do, its base power and toughness are halved, kind of like a prototype cost. However, you also have to choose a color of wire to cut, which in essence removes those keywords. If you cut the yellow wire, it's a 3/3 with Myriad. If you cut the red wire, it's a 3/3 with First Strike, Haste, and Flying. If you cut the green wire, it's a 3/3 with Menace, Haste, and Flying. And if you cut the blue wire, it's a 3/3 with Menace, First Strike, and Fire Breathing for 1 red mana. By the way, if you aren't aware, Fire Breathing is magic slang for pay this much, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Where to begin with this card? This has excellent resonance, being a time bomb with a visual aid using clippable wires to help determine how powerful the card is. Displaying it on another Magic card, like the Mystery Booster playtest cards, also works great, lending itself to the somewhat pressing situation this card is imagining itself in. Oh no, I reveal my normal Magic card and it's actually a bomb! I can't talk about this card further without diving into the innovation aspect. It really does nail the puzzle of finding out which is the correct wire to cut. See, in a commander game, there are a lot of factors to how a card like this wants to play on board. Obviously, playing this for 6 mana is very powerful, since it gets to retain all of its powerful abilities. However, you don't always have the luxury of dropping an unprotected and counterable 6-drop. So the diffuse option gives you a great way to game the board by finding the right mix of keywords to get ahead. Are you dominating the board? Perhaps a 3/3 with Myriad will have the most damage output. Just a clarification here, much like Prototype, the Myriad copies will act as if they were diffused in the same manner, so no, it doesn't give you a bunch of 6/6s. Back to the supposition, maybe your opponent has plenty of flyers, so you opt for the blue wire. The little knobs on this card are satisfying and interesting, meaning at any time you have 3 mana, you'll likely have a useful creature for the current board. Now, on to the main topic here, grokkability. The only slip on this card is perhaps clearing up Fire Breathing, but I think the ability is likely well known enough. The clear visual language really takes the cake here, especially on the little details such as the timer. The timer lets you know what the diffuse cost is in a subtle way. You just have both sides of the timer. That way you won't get confused on how to have it and end up paying 1 generic and 2 red. The wires being bright, distinct, and not touching each other clears up how to actually track the keywords, deviating from the normal shtick of all the diffusing wires being tangled up in service to greater readability. Finally, the meat of the card being in the top and the nitty-gritty rules below the black band of the explosives allows the card to breathe and not be too dense or cluttered. Once you understand how the card works, you don't need to see the bottom of it at all. As I talked about last video, retaining the general positions of magic card elements is key. And this card retains the timer mana cost on the top right, the big PT power toughness box on the bottom right, and only scoots the type line down in this case, so you don't have to go searching far for it. Just a great layout that in older Hellscubes might have been relegated to a play aid or a helper card. On to Hellscube 7, we'll be talking about ye old Dread Shop. It's a green Saga shop enchantment that costs 2 generic and 1 green mana. It functions like a normal Saga, except it gives you coin counters that you can spend on objects in the shop in the art. On the first 3 chapters, you get 2 coin counters each and can purchase from the shop each chapter. On the final chapter, the 4th, you get 4 more coin counters and can purchase as many items as you can afford. There are 2 clue tokens for 3 coins each, 3 food tokens for 1 coin each, 1 treasure token for 2 coins, and you can summon your Dreadmaw for 6 coins. Now, I won't be getting too deep into your Dreadmaw this time, but at a minimum, you basically summon a copy of Colossal Dreadmaw from outside the game if you have no other cards affecting your Dreadmaw. The resonance of this card is interesting. Rather than playing off a specific card, it's leaning into the shop theme in visuals, mechanics, and the type line. The little card holders displaying the clue tokens are just a great attention to detail, varying up the displays from just item on shelf. The little shadowed cash register sells this as a dinky little shop just selling a few small things. The meat of this card, though, is the innovation. Resource cards like this aren't new to Magic, though it's usually done in a more direct way via things like Trading Post. What this offers is a unique resource to spend on its own storefront that makes it interesting. You see, sagas in general are supposed to accumulate a lot of long-term value, and this shop variation serves as a sort of deconstruction of value, allowing you to pick and choose how this value manifests as the turn progresses. Now, perhaps going in, you just want to stock some treasures, but eventually it becomes clear you need a threat from the Dreadmaw. The layout, too, assists in providing this value. This has 4 separate items to purchase, and instead of feeling cluttered like any other card that has 4 options with costs associated, it actually feels a little barren and rinky-dink. The way it displays its limited stock, too, is genius, using its clear visuals over cluttered rules text. This shop subtype is one I see a lot of legs with, and hopefully we can see more with similar levels of tools used to make for clearer shopping. Finally, the grokkability is something I've touched on, but I want to draw attention to is the font size on the signs. The words are large, visible, and all colored to be easy to read. The only thing I could possibly think of to increase this card's grokkability is actually removing reminder text. The standard Saga reminder text is something people tend to leave on, but in this case, the real important bits are about the shop functionality. Still, this is a big step up from older cards, which may have used a separate player aid to give you this much information on how to use it. It's astounding how much blank space there is to let the card breathe while still having so much rich functionality and varied text. Regardless, I have to reiterate how much this crams in by just having distinct visual language communicating the stock amounts, the price, and the distinct cards in the shop. Alright, we're on to Hellscube 8 with a quite value-heavy card. Get Increasingly Pissed. It's a red Saga enchantment that costs 2 generic mana and 1 red mana with 3 chapters. Chapter 1 conjures a copy of Monstrous Rage into your hand, Chapter 2 conjures 2 copies of Reckless Rage into your hand, and Chapter 3 conjures 3 copies of Pinnacle of Rage into your hand. Resonance-wise, this card nails it. It combines nearly every iconic angry card art with the concept of a slow burn saga that just gives you more and more rage-themed cards as you're getting more progressively pissed. The scattered pile of conjured cards gives you the sense of frustrated rage this card is going for. And even the little touch of fire behind the conjured cards where the normal saga card art goes is a nice subtle detail. The way the 2 on the second chapter is framed highlights the tension between those two as well, just as a little added bonus. As far as innovation, this is about the peak of what I've been hinting at this entire video. In modern times, this is one of the better ways to show what conjured cards do, focusing on showcasing the additional text in a way that supplements the art without making the card feel unnecessarily cluttered. In fact, I'd say any sense of clutteredness from the volume of cards on the right adds to the resonance. On its surface, it's a saga that generates buffs and removal spells, but it's really a great value engine to support a deck that wants to play at least the mid-game and give you ways to interact, even if inefficient. I would say the presentation here is a stellar example of how modern cards have refined the art of including conjured cards on the card itself. Finally, with Grok ability, this capitalizes on its card space by leaving nearly no part of the card bare, but at the same time, the important text is all visible and not unnecessarily crowded. Each chapter has plenty of room, and each card only cuts off pieces of the art or flavor text. Notably, with Reckless Rage, it cleverly uses two orientations of the card to show off the mana cost and the rules text on two separate versions of the card. The only spot covered, really, is the Enchantment Saga part, which is explained pretty easily with the enchantment border and the Saga reminder text. The hidden complexity of the effect, the various damage numbers it gives, are spaced out each turn to give you time to find the best uses of all three of its other components. And with that, that's all of the main cubes. Hopefully you've been able to see the through line across these, where each card has had ancillary information or a lot of explanatory text it's had to deal with in its design, and how each card has overcome that challenge with evolving design sensibilities, going from the easy option of a separate play aid explaining everything, to cleverly putting reminder and rules text in spaces that enhance the joke, to smartly designed presentations that link the resonance to increased ease of reading and grokkability. That brings me to the last section, where I walk you through the creation of a Hellscard that made it through submissions and into the cube. This time, I'll be talking about one quite on theme with today's discussion: one mana value trick pony. This card started with just the pun of one trick pony and combat tricks. I was thinking of a good presentation for this card, starting with a traditional Magic frame, before my mind drifted to pony rides at fall festivals and such. So I pivoted to using Canva to find some pre-existing templates for a poster for something like that, eventually stumbling on to this one. As I mentioned last time, non-traditional looking cards need to be careful with visual composition to retain easy clarity. So I added a few elements to line up with that better, trying to segregate each element with different font colors to be more readily apparent that they were their own section. For the art, I had to find a good pony in MTG, and Bill the Pony worked great with the framing. Once I slotted him in, I scooted each element around the art to make for a more clean reading path. For the effect, I knew I wanted a repeatable one mana value trick, and the hardest part was finding out which one. Eventually, Wings of the Cosmos was picked for sheer usefulness, both on the turn you play it and off turn on opponents' combats, making this a good mana sink and pairing well with the self-targeting archetype in Hellscube 8. Now, one of the issues of nested cards, as we've discussed, is finding a good spot to place them on the card itself. Thankfully, since this was non-traditional, I could use the additional card as a sort of anchor to the whole composition. One of my favorite techniques in making fun Hellscards is shrinking cards, where I try and cut out all the dead space on a card and its art to make it as small as possible. I think I got pretty small in this one, as it retains a lot of its readability while sloughing off over half of the card's normal size. The rules text took some work too, as initially I was relying on some more pithy text, but it was unclear whether or not you could continue to keep casting the trick, so I settled on one copy. It isn't standard Magic templating, but Hellscards are able to lean on intuitive templating if it isn't ambiguous templating. Last, I pulled the PT box from the Bloomborough showcases, as I felt the woodland theme belonged with this style of card. Something I want to note is that including nested cards or ancillary information shouldn't feel like an afterthought. Successful cards are ones that incorporate the additional information into its composition, hopefully using it to enhance the aesthetics and humor while either improving or at least not detrimentally affecting the readability. As I mentioned last time, you can do a text size comparison of any additional card texts to see if they'll still be readable in a draft setting or printed on paper. If you use a site to make custom cards normally, I'd encourage you to run your finished product through that site to size it like a normal Magic card and add the transparent corners. It really helps figure out if you're working at the right aspect ratio for your card. In case you're wondering, I like to ballpark my renders around 2000 by 2800 pixels, as that's around the size of a high resolution custom Magic card. As long as you're working at that ratio for vertical style Magic cards, it should fit the frame and a paper print just fine. And that's all I have. Thanks for joining me on Frame the Masterpieces, and I hope to see you all in the submissions channel of the Hellscube Discord.